This is Thank You Mama, weekly lessons from mothers all around the world. Hello and welcome to Thank You Mama. My name is Anna Teider and I am very, very excited to introduce to you my guest today. Rosjke Hasseldine is a therapist specializing in mother-daughter relationships, a coach, a teacher, the founder of Mother-Daughter Coaching International, and author of The Mother-Daughter Puzzle, a book I just finished reading and can't recommend highly enough. And I found this interesting quote, I think on Rosjke's website, that very nicely describes what she does. Rosjke wants to create a new conversation that takes mother-daughter relationship conflict seriously and honors how central the mother-daughter relationship is to women's psychological development, emotional empowerment, and fight for equality. Rosjke,
thank you, Anna.
Welcome.
Thank you so much.
I think this puts it very nicely together, doesn't it?
I think that's perfect. That is perfect. I couldn't have said it better myself. So
I don't know where I found it, but I found it and I thought this is it. And I especially love the fight for equality because you talk so much about patriarchy and how women's voices were suppressed for millennia. And how important it is to understand our mothers and understand our relationship and understand where this conflict might be coming from. Because as you say, it's the path for freeing and for equality and for finding a different and the deserved place in the society.
Exactly.
So
yes.
Thank you for being here with me today. Let's start with you telling us a little bit about what brought you to this topic. What is your story? What is your journey? How did you discover this very, very important topic?
Well, I mean, it wouldn't be hard to guess that it was my mother, obviously. I come from so I was born in New Zealand. Both my parents are Dutch. And I come from a family of women who wore martyrdom like a badge of honor. Completely, there was no language or voice that even recognizes that women have needs of their own. And my great-grandmother, this comes from my great-grandmother, my grandmother, my mother. And so my relationship with my mother, which is fairly common, started becoming difficult during my teenage years. And it was actually when my daughter was born that I had this epiphany. And I knew that I had to really understand what had gone wrong between my mum and I, what was it like for women in my family, what I'd internalized, in terms of particularly the silencing and the martyrdom, putting everybody's needs before their own, and the emotional consequence to that, to women, to my mother, to me, and how that had harmed our relationship so that I would have a different relationship with my daughter. And that in a sense, I needed to set myself free, i.e. claim my own voice so that I could then enable her to have her own. So it started in a really personal quest. But this is the late 1980s, New Zealand. There was my mother, myself, Nancy Friday. There were just a few books around. So very quickly it became a profession. I knew this. I was bitten by it. I knew in my bones this was what I was going to do for the rest of my life. So, that's where it led me to do my counselling masters in America and set up a practice working with mothers and daughters when nobody else was. I didn't know. I started in 1997 and I didn't know anybody else specializing in mothers and daughters.
But people still don't teach this. I interviewed another lady who is a therapist and also specialized in mothers-daughters relationship. And she said when she was at the university and when she was going through her training, this was not taught. she said she was shocked that we behave as if this relationship wouldn't exist. And it's one of the most important relationships ever.
It is very shocking. And I've written quite a bit about this, particularly in Medium blogs, that I wasn't taught it. I got a very good education at Indiana University, but there was no mother-daughter. And so basically, and I knew when I started, I could tell that some of the things that I've been taught, because a lot of the theories we're taught are created by men.
Yeah.
So they're seeing women through their male, like if you're talking about attachment theory, Bowlby, 1940s, upper-class male, that's how he sees women. And that's how they're women defined. So I basically had to throw out the rules and I had to find my own, this is how I created the mother-daughter attachment model. I had to find a better way of understanding what was going on between mothers and daughters and how to heal that conflict. But I'm on a mission. It needs to be taught in every training organisation that teaches counselling or coaching, that works with women.
Absolutely. But tell me, Rosjke, this turned into you becoming a therapist and a coach, but you also wrote a book and you started educating people, you started training people, you started the women's power groups. Is this what they're called? Sorry.
Yes, the women's power circles. Actually, that's where the teaching started. I ran a lot of women's power circles when I lived in Nottingham, England. I lived there for many years before I moved to America. So after I graduated, we moved to England. And that's where, in a sense, it started. And in a way, it started for two reasons. Three. Firstly, I wanted clients, I wanted women to see what I was seeing, that the silence, the invisibility, the lack of entitlement, there were some distinct themes that were running through women's lives, regardless of their background or economic or cultural background. And just telling a client, I don't think was cutting it. I wanted them to see it for themselves. And so that was one of the main reasons that I started this. And I actually firmly believe that there was a lot of change can happen when women gather in small groups to talk about their mother-daughter history. We see the harm patriarchy inflicts. We see the emotional impact of patriarchy and the violence that women experience. But I was already struggling to get my profession, the counselling profession, to acknowledge the centrality of the mother-daughter relationship. So in a sense, I was hoping to use the women's power circles to reinforce this more, which sort of worked a little bit.
I want to ask you a few things. I want to first ask you to very shortly maybe introduce the mother-daughter history mapping, because I found that fascinating in your book, and I urge so many of my friends to buy the book also for the history, because you offer such a beautiful structured way for us to try to understand what happened in previous generations. Yeah, just tell us a little bit about it.
Certainly. Again, that was one of the things that developed, because I was taught to do what family systems calls genograms. But I became increasingly frustrated, because how can we map what I call what's going on behind a woman's eyes, her actual emotional reality, if in her family she's never asked what she thought, never asked what she felt, what she needed, and she's taught to need what other people need her to need. She's taught to think of other people and to fit herself around. That's the kind of genogram you're going to get. So I threw out the rules and started again with so if I was doing your map, in the middle of the page, you'd be you, the daughter, your mother, your grandmother. And on the left, there'd be the men. And I absolutely want to say I acknowledge that men are affected by patriarchy, absolutely. But this is not the space for this. The men are there to sort of map out how they treat the women, their wives or partners and their daughters. And on the right are your grandmother's or your mother's sibling or your siblings, and particularly focus on the eldest daughter, because a lot of this lands more heavily on the eldest daughter. And we map out some facts, obviously, education, when people died, careers, but the main, to me, the gold in it, for want of a bit of a term, is the emotional reality. How were women listened to, or were they silenced? How were women supported, or were they neglected? What happened to their career goals, which leads directly to a lot of grief and a lot of jealousy, which I think that's another topic in terms of that's seriously misunderstood when mothers are jealous of their daughters, because I see it as grief. So really mapping out what's, like if it's your map, your emotional reality and what your perception is of your mother's emotional reality and what's been passed down.
And a lot of it comes down to one of the most important for me aspects in your book, which is the simple question, what do you need emotionally? Which sounds very easy, but when you start thinking about it, it is so difficult for everybody, for men and women equally, to figure out, A, but B, for women especially, to communicate. So that I took as a big task for myself, to talk to my family about this, to think about this. What do I need emotionally? And how can I get it? And to as you in your book say, that should be something we talk openly about. You know, I would like to know what my husband needs emotionally. I'd like to hear his thoughts about that, and how he would like to get it, so we can support each other in that. So that's a fantastic point in the book. Mm-hmm. But also, what I wanted to ask you is, I think you're my 140th interview, actually, Rosjke.
Really?
Yes.
Wow.
I was just, 140th interview, and women from more than 60 countries. I stopped counting at one point when countries started repeating it. And when I ask women about the most important lessons, very often, 90% of times, women will talk about taking care of others.
Yes.
And in the beginning, when I started these interviews, I thought, how beautiful, how beautiful we women take care of others. And this is what we teach our daughters. And it's so nice. And we generally need to take care of others more in this world. This is something that's really missing. This attitude, this mothering concept in the world. But then, little by little, I started being critical about this and questioning, and especially when one of my last interviews, I had a wonderful lady with an Italian mom who gave up her job when her third daughter was born to take care of the children and elderly parents. And I recorded this interview many years ago. I just published it when I still wasn't thinking in this direction. And I asked my guest at one point about self-care. Did mom, and back then for me, self-care was taking walks or taking a bath, meditating and stuff like that. And she started talking about, I wonder if my mom would have been happier if she continued working. And it was very interesting that she connected work with self-care, which translates for me nowadays into just not being there to selflessly take care of everybody else.
Exactly.
But I have a big question here for you, Rosjke, because this is something I'm struggling with, and I think many, many women do. We do know and we do accept that this idea of women as caregivers is, a lot of that is programmed into us by the society, men go out and they hunt, we take care of the household and the babies. But I definitely recognize in myself, I just have that urge. This is something that is not only programmed into me by the society, but it's just there.
Yes.
How do we understand how much taking care of others is good and healthy and beautiful, and how much is unhealthy?
I think this is a really important question, actually. Because firstly, I think caregiving needs to be seen as a human quality, not just a female quality, because men can take care too. And patriarchy teaches men that that's, and in a sense, by seeing caretaking as a female quality only and then diminished. So it's connected to dots with the devaluing of the mother.
Yes. So
by actually making caregiving as a normal thing we do as human beings, we care for others. I think we'd have a very different society, a much, much better society. Yes. It would also loosen the burden of women and give space for that caregiving. And that's what I call about the cultural female service. Caregiving within patriarchy is seen as a women thing, like women care, but they don't receive. It's a giving thing rather than receiving thing, when it needs to be both. And I think the fear in this that awakes when people talk about this, then I'm not going to be caring. Yes, you are, because it's who you are. I'm also I want to know what's going on with people. I am wired like that. But it shouldn't be at the expense of what's going on for me. So caring for others should not be at the expense, because if it is, and coming back to the mother-daughter history map, what happens then is that what I call the river of nurturing flows backwards. So if there's no conversation, nobody's asking what mum needs, it's the daughter, and often the oldest daughter, that then unconsciously picks that language up and then checks for. And while she's doing that, she is not listening to herself. Firstly, there's no language for it. And secondly, she's focused on mum, which is how it will then continue with her daughter. So it is actually a central piece in helping heal mother-daughter conflict. The simple but incredibly difficult question, what do you need? And having that heard, honoured, respected, facilitated.
Yes. And another thing I would like to put out there, because I do witness that with some of my friends and family, is women sometimes take care of others because they think that will give them back the love.
Yes.
And what happens is exactly the opposite. The others just take and take and take. She dries herself out. She becomes angry and frustrated and unhappy and unhealthy.
Yes.
And there's no reciprocity here.
Yes.
So
reciprocity.
So we sometimes are wired to think, subconsciously probably, that by taking care of everybody and everything, they will return with the love that we lack. But very often they don't. It's not how it works. You wanted to talk about mother blaming. Let's talk about that quickly.
Let's talk about mother blaming, because it's on the increase. I mean, it's been around for a long time, and actually I would recommend a book here. Paula Kaplan, the new Don't Blame Mother book, is, I would say, the quintessential book on mother blaming. It's really easy to read. It's very good. So Paula Kaplan, the new Don't Blame Mother. And as she writes in there, it's like the air we breathe. And it's connected to the cultural female service. If mothers are expected to be there for everyone, but not themselves, so therefore if it all goes wrong, it's mum's fault. But what I'm seeing at the moment is daughters in there particularly, so mother-daughter estrangement was a fairly rare thing, and it's really the last chance, last option. But it's really on the increase at the moment, with particularly daughters in their 20s and 30s deciding to cut mum out of their life, blaming mum for being narcissistic is a favourite one at the moment, very toxic. And often I'm seeing the mum and I think, where is this coming from? I don't see that. Mum is completely blindsided about it, doesn't understand what's going on. And this is where I'm even more concerned, is that in many of these cases, these young daughters are seeing an individual therapist. Mm. And the individual therapist is saying your mum is too toxic to have a connection with, without seeing the mum, without really understanding what's going on. So I think what I'm seeing here, and my graduates are seeing the same thing, and it's not just in America, we're seeing it in England, we're seeing it in other countries. Firstly, social media, I think, has got their fingerprints all over it. There are Reddit and Facebook groups where, they're just spewing out their anger at their mum without any analysis, and just basically it's like an echo chamber. And so social media, I think, has got a big responsibility. And the other responsibility is the therapy world, I think, because I think what we're seeing here is the lack of training, the lack of understanding of the dynamics, and the use of attachment theory, Bowlby's attachment theory and Mary Ainsworth's attachment theory, which is completely correct, with the exception it's used to blame mum. So if mum wasn't present enough in whatever form, without understanding maybe why, or is then responsible for any of the adult daughter's issues, which, is she? I would question mark that, because there have been many influences in the daughter's life by then. And then there's also a father, and then there's other people in the family. Yeah. So in a sense, I think patriarchy's got hold of this theory, and are using it, and it's being used incorrectly.
But Rosjke, I would like to put two things out there. One is this terribly scary, and now I sound like an old person, terribly scary trend of victimization.
Correct.
That has been going on for quite a long time. It started in the US, and it's very, very destructive.
I agree.
Not constructive. Because, we could go on forever. Why? But I think this is part of the reason why you're noticing this. Because, mom is so evil and I'm the victim.
Yes.
And the second one is it's just the easy way out, both for the therapist and for the person. If you just find somebody who's guilty, it's the easy way out. It is so much harder to understand where mom comes from. What is the history where grandmother comes from? In my case, where a paternal great-grandmother comes from, and understand what's going on. And I see it with even these short interviews I have in my guests, how often they say they're grateful for the questions and for the chance to talk about their mother's lives and derive these lessons from there, because it makes them put things in the story of their mother's lives and the societies they lived in and times they lived in.
Exactly. And to understand the mom in the context in which she lived, that she did the best she could with the knowledge she had and the support she had. Mothers cannot mother beyond the emotional, practical support that they get, and what their generation allowed them to think they're entitled to.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely.
There's an absolute ceiling there. And blaming mom for not providing something or not being a kind of mom or which was completely out of her experience and completely outside of what she was supported to do, I think is cruel. Yeah. It is harmful and cruel, and it's bringing us nowhere.
It isn't. And I'm sorry you're a therapist, but this therapy language becoming used in everyday life and being colloquialized, and this way of thinking and analyzing and throwing blames around is also not very healthy for us.
it really isn't.
I when I exercise, I listen to my Spotify mix, and then I like some, fun music that so I put it on a radio, find a fun new song, and then I put it on a playlist, so it plays all this new music for me that I would normally never get to hear. And I was shocked how much therapy language there is in this new generations and this new music. It's very, very, very surprising how self-analyzing all of this is. We surely didn't think or talk in these terms in our 20s.
No.
Rosjke, we could talk forever, but let's
I know.
let's jump to Mama Tineke. Tineke?
Tineke.
Sorry.
Tineke. Teen or Tineke. That was my mother's name.
Yeah.
Tineke. Yes.
Tell me a little bit. She also has a very, very interesting story. Tell me about her life.
Yes, she does have a very interesting. She was actually born in Indonesia, so she's Dutch, and her parents were Dutch. But my great grandfather actually was a missionary. So my grandmother was born in Indonesia because her father was a missionary, and it was normal in those days to ship kids back to the motherland by themselves at 5 or 6. And I don't think my grandmother ever recovered from that. So my great-grandmother never mothered her children after 5 or 6. So my grandmother married my grandfather, and they moved back to Indonesia because I think she wanted to be back with her mom. And so my mother was born there. They remained in Indonesia during the Second World War. So unfortunately, my mom and my grandmother and my grandfather and my mother's siblings were interned in a Japanese concentration camp for 2 years. And I don't know how my grandmother did it, but they all survived. She even gave birth to my aunt during the camp, and she survived. But I think it set a tone set a dynamic more of, because my grandfather was separated, so it was just my grandmother, my mother, and there was 8 years difference. So my mother became very much have to look after mum. And you can see that was her survival. She wasn't going to survive the camp without a mother who had beriberi at the end and was actually fainting. So she couldn't have survived much longer. And then the whole family, my parents and my grandparents actually immigrated to New Zealand, which was where I was born. So my mum was also educated as a secondary school teacher, but she grew up in the time sort of post-Second World War where you get married, you leave your job, you have children. But like your other guest, I absolutely know we would have all been happier. She would have been much happier had she gone back teaching. And she had opportunities, but it was a belief she had. She was not going to take another man's job. That's the post-Second World War thinking. Yeah. She'd swallowed it whole. So one of her main problems with me for most of my life was me going to university while the kids were young, setting up my private practice. I worked, and I broke that rule. Never got over that. Yeah. Yeah.
So she had you and...
There's 5 of us, actually.
There's 5 of you, okay.
Yes, I'm the eldest, and there's a sister and 3 brothers.
So where did she live then for the rest of her life? She left Indonesia.
She left Indonesia. She went back to Holland for about, I would say, 8 to 9 years, roughly, which is where she met my father. And then they immigrated to New Zealand just after they got married.
So you describe her as a stoic and emotionally silent woman, which we now understand where that comes from. What did you learn from her? What do you think would be the most important things you've learned from her?
I think a couple of things. I think again I have this memory of watching my mother. This is New Zealand, 1970s, every day walking to the corner shop, getting the bread and looking depressed. She wanted so much more. She needed so much more, but she couldn't have so much more. So sadly, she taught me, don't do that. Find the more you need. Claim it for yourself. That, I think, yeah. I mean, my heart goes out to her, really. She wasn't an easy person. She was very controlling. But that's that image I have of her. I think, what a waste. I mean, how I could actually I'm tearing up now. I mean, what a sad waste. She could have been, I'm pretty sure she was a really good teacher. It's very sad, but that's what patriarchy does to women.
But look, you changed it.
I changed it.
You changed it, and that's amazing.
Yes.
Yep. Are there any other lessons that you feel she had taught you?
My mother was actually, so on a positive note, my mother created a really lovely sort of, if the family gathered in terms of dining table and with flowers and stuff, my mother was really, she was very creative. And again, I think could have done more in terms of painting and stuff if she'd given herself the time or was allowed to have the time. But so that's something in terms of that I feel taking the time to make something look beautiful is important. And I think the badge of honor, the selflessness, the martyrdom, seeing in her and my grandmother that she even put on my grandmother's gravestone. I'm translating here from Dutch. My grandmother gave her life, sacrificed her life for everyone, as if that was like a great thing. Isn't it? Because then we miss out on who that person is. You can't be fully present as your own person if you're martyring yourself. So, yeah.
You know, it's so interesting. I grew up with a mom who had 2 very successful careers, which she loved passionately. There were vocations more than careers. She was a movie star and admired for her beauty equally as for her talent. And activism, she was always chose roles to talk about women and women in society and women's roles in society. But then parallel to that, she finished the Academy of Arts and became a painter and graphic designer. And she was equally successful and admired and awarded in these 2 very different fields. And when I was younger, you know, something had to give, of course. When I was younger, I was envious of my friends whose moms were there to prepare breakfast, and you know, dinner was on the table, and there was a schedule and a structure. But looking back now, I wouldn't change it for a thing, because she gave me so much more than a warm meal and a packed fresh sandwich for school. You know what I mean?
I do know what you mean.
I'm just supporting this theory, this martyrdom and this taking care of others doesn't have to cost us so much, and that we can give so much more than a warm sandwich and driving kids from left to right.
I agree.
You know, I always ask my guests, and this became a very important question, if there was something important you would wish she was able to teach you. But I have a feeling you've already answered that with your first answer. Is there, is there anything more that comes to your mind when you think about, I wish my mom had taught me this?
I think, in terms of, I actually, when you're talking about your mum, it's sort of, I've always suspected my mother in a different generation, in a different family with different experiences, my mother would have been an ardent feminist. I really believe she had so much passion and drive, but I'm afraid it was thwarted and misdirected. But I'm absolutely convinced she would have been a great feminist. So I think there were hidden gems there that were never sort of ignited. But because they couldn't, and I don't think she could have done it for herself. So there's the mother blaming. I cannot blame her for that because she didn't have the match. Nobody gave it to her. Yeah. So, but I think it was there, and maybe it was passed on to me.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm still her daughter in many ways. Yeah, I just express it differently. So, yeah.
When did she pass away? Do you think she would have been very proud? Did she witness what you're working with?
She was very threatened by it, I'm afraid. Yes. And now that is interesting. And I have sort of, it's that life-threatening illness I had was 6 weeks after she passed.
Oh.
So I think the two are connected. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. No matter what our relationships were like, losing our mother is really an earth-shattering spiritual moment for us, especially as daughters. I am sure for sons as well, but for daughters, it's no matter what the relationship was like.
Yeah, yeah. But look at it. She gave me my career, my passion. Which is now teaching. So without her meaning to or wanting to, she's still done a lot of good.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was not quite what she was hoping for, but you know what I mean. Yeah.
Maybe now she's like, oh, I was hoping for a wrong thing. Look how amazing Rosjke is.
Exactly. Nobody comes back to tell us what it's like up there. So, yeah.
Rosjke, thank you so much for this beautiful, beautiful conversation. And thank you for your work. Thank you for your books. And I'm very excited to hear what's coming in the future because you're preparing some fantastic projects. And just before we started recording, I think we started making little plans to bring you to Vienna and
that
maybe organize some lectures here. And we will make sure to inform my listeners if and when this is happening. It would be amazing to get a fantastic group of women together to work on this deeply important topic together and inspire each other. Yeah.
I would love that. And I want to thank you. Thank you. I'm so glad to have met you. I'm so glad. Thank you for your podcast because you're giving a beautiful voice, a strong voice through Thank You, Mama, to counterbalance a lot of the blaming and the negativity. So I really, hand on heart, thank you for your work too. So, yeah.
Thank you, Rosjke. And as always, we'll put a link to your website in my episode notes, so everybody who's interested about you, to learn more about you and your work, will know how to find you.
Thank you.
If you enjoy Thank You, Mama, and want to help it grow, please take the 2 seconds to leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps. If you'd like to get in touch, you can send me a mail at info@thankyouMama.net. You can also find me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter under Anna Teider, that's Tajder. This was Thank You, Mama. Come back next week, subscribe, and tell your friends.